All right, so today we're diving into something that hits home for a lot of folks, veterans issues.
Big topic.
Yeah, and we're zeroing in on Senator Marco Rubio's work on this.
Okay.
Got a bunch of stuff. We've got like his official bio, some legislation about maybe changing up the VA, even a Senate hearing transcript where things got a little spicy.
Ooh, interesting.
So the mission here, to cut through the noise and see what Rubio's actually doing for veterans, beyond the political talk.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in all the rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
Especially with something as emotionally charged as this.
Exactly.
But looking at his actions and what people directly affected are saying, that's how we get the real picture.
For sure. So first up, Rubio's bio. I
Yeah.
always find it interesting, the stuff that shapes a politician's viewpoint. So Rubio's parents, Cuban immigrants, his grandfather fled communism.
Wow.
And his dad, bartender, passed away right before Rubio got elected to the Senate.
Man, that's heavy. You think those experiences play into his focus on the American dream, economic opportunity, especially for working class families, diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that would resonate with veterans, right? Trying to rebuild their lives, looking for that future.
Absolutely. Like he's speaking directly to their hopes and fears.
And there's this line in his bio that really jumped out at me. He says, America is the greatest country the world has ever known, but we have serious problems at home and dangerous challenges abroad. What do you think he's signaling there, especially with veterans in mind?
I think he's acknowledging the good and the bad, right? Saying we need to fix things here at home while staying strong on the world stage.
Makes sense.
Could mean focusing on support systems for veterans here, but also keeping a strong national defense.
Right. Those two often go hand in hand in the political arena.
Absolutely.
Okay, so big picture stuff aside, what about the nitty-gritty, the actual work he's doing on veterans issues?
Well, his website has a whole section dedicated to this. It's like a highlight reel of his accomplishments. He's big on reforming the VA, helping veterans find work, and honoring those who've died serving.
Interesting how he frames it, right? Presenting himself as a real champion for veterans, tackling those big issues head on.
Yeah.
But the question is, do these priorities line up with what veterans actually need on the ground?
That's the key question, something for our listeners to think about.
Definitely.
So he talks about passing the VA Accountability Act, the PACT Act, and legislation to help veterans in STEM careers. Now, for those who aren't familiar, the PACT Act was huge. Expanded health care for veterans exposed to toxic stuff.
Right, like burn pits?
Exactly. Or the water contamination at Camp Lejeune.
Yeah, that Marine base where the water was messed up for decades.
Awful situation. And the VA Accountability Act, that was aimed at dealing with problems within the VA, like negligence, misconduct, making it easier to fire employees who weren't doing their jobs, protecting whistleblowers.
Exactly. And then him supporting veterans in STEM, that shows a forward-thinking approach.
Recognizing the skills they bring.
Right. But are these the biggest issues veterans face today? What do you think?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
To really gauge the impact, we got to understand the lived experiences of veterans. Are these initiatives actually making their lives easier?
Okay, so we need to dig deeper. And that brings us to this hefty document, S.291. It's a bill to create a whole new thing within the VA, the Veterans Economic Opportunity and Transition Administration.
Wow.
Yeah, it's about streamlining services, creating this separate entity focused on their economic success.
Ambitious.
Right. And the bill even sets deadlines, reporting requirements. Like they want to see results.
Emphasizing accountability there.
Yeah. But I'm wondering, could this actually cut through the red tape, make things easier for veterans? Or will it just create more bureaucracy and confusion?
It's a good question, right? Sometimes these efforts to streamline, they backfire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We got to ask, is this truly the most effective way to help veterans transition and achieve that economic security?
Absolutely. And speaking of digging deeper, that takes us to the Senate hearing transcript. We're about to step into a room where these issues were debated, sometimes pretty passionately.
Ooh, I love it when things get a little heated.
Yeah, it gives us a glimpse into how these policies get made.
Totally. And there's this exchange with Senator Tillis that I found super interesting. He was really concerned about veterans getting taken advantage of by for-profit service providers.
Ah, yeah, especially with those Camp Lejeune claims.
Yeah, he was worried about lawyers and consultants charging these outrageous fees to veterans who are already struggling.
Right, it's a big tension point, the role of for-profit versus nonprofit in helping veterans.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the transcript has some specific examples that are honestly kind of shocking.
Like what?
Lawyers demanding huge payments up front or taking a big chunk of any settlement. It's really upsetting.
It's definitely concerning. It makes you think, how do we ensure veterans have access to professional help without leaving them vulnerable to exploitation?
It's a tough balance.
It is.
And speaking of protecting veterans, there's another bill we need to look at, the G-Guard Act. This one's about bringing back criminal penalties for people who aren't accredited, but charge fees to help with VA claims.
Okay, seems straightforward enough. Protect veterans from shady operators.
Right. But it's actually more complicated than that.
Yeah.
So a lot of veterans service organizations, the VSOs, they love the GUARD Act. But VA officials, they admit that some for-profit folks out there are actually legitimate. And get this, they said they don't even have data on how widespread this problem is.
Really? So they don't have a clear picture of how many veterans are affected by this. That's surprising.
Right. How can they address it effectively without that information?
It's a good point. Maybe we need more research, a more nuanced approach to regulation.
Okay, so we've got a politician with a compelling story, a dedication to veterans, a website showcasing his wins, a plan to shake up the VA, and a heated discussion about protecting veterans from being taken advantage of.
We're seeing just how complex this all is. Finding solutions that actually work for veterans, it's not easy.
Not at all, but that's what we're here for, right? To dig deep and try to make sense of it all.
Exactly.
So is the G-Guard Act the answer? Or is it, like, overkill?
Mm.
The hearing transcript gives us more to chew on.
Yeah, one thing that came up was like how important accreditation is for people helping veterans with claims.
Senator King really pushed the VA on that, huh?
He did. Accredited reps, whether they're VSOs, lawyers, or claims agents, they got to meet certain standards.
Right, and they're overseen by the VA.
Mm.
That's to protect veterans from people who aren't qualified or who might be unethical, right?
Exactly. And accredited reps, they have to file every single fee agreement with the VA. So everything's transparent, what they're charging.
Keeps things fair, prevents those crazy fees.
Yeah, but some argued that the accreditation process is like a huge pain, especially for smaller groups or, individuals who just want to help.
I can see that. Could create barriers, right?
Yeah.
Limit veterans' choices for getting help.
Exactly. Like it stifles competition, maybe even prevents veterans from getting the help they need. That was their argument.
Makes you think. And then there's the whole thing about contingency fees. That came up a lot with the Camp Lejeune stuff.
Right. Contingency fees, that's when the lawyer only gets paid if they win the case. It's pretty common in personal injury cases.
Yeah, but can be kind of controversial.
Yes.
Especially when there's a lot of money on the line.
Yeah, Senator Tillis even brought up this idea of a Patriot Bill of Rights for veterans who need a lawyer.
Intriguing. What's that about?
So he wants lawyers to have to tell potential clients about all their options before they sign anything.
Interesting.
Like explain they could contact the VA directly or their congressperson or get free help from a VSO.
It's like making sure veterans aren't pressured into something they don't fully understand.
Right, and that they know they have other choices. Shows how worried people are about veterans getting taken advantage of.
For sure. But let's switch gears a sec. Tie this back to Rubio's thing about economic opportunity for veterans. That's a thread through all this.
Totally. Senator Hassan was really passionate about the VA's economic benefit programs.
Right, like the GI Bill, the home loan program, career help through veteran readiness and employment.
Yep, all that. They're supposed to help veterans transition, get education, buy homes, find decent jobs.
And Hassan was saying they need more attention, more resources. She actually co-sponsored a bill with Rubio.
Oh, yeah. The one to create that separate Veterans Economic Opportunity and Transition Administration within the VA.
That's the one. The thinking is, if you have a whole administration focused on economic stuff, it streamlines everything. Veterans get the support they need to actually thrive.
Makes sense. And a rep from Disabled American Veterans, the DAV, they backed the bill. They were talking about how hard it is to even get an electronic case management system for the VRNE counselors. And they said, with a separate administration, that kind of bureaucratic mess wouldn't happen.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the question is, are these programs, as they are now, really working?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, we've heard how tough it is for veterans to get benefits, to deal with all the VA red tape.
Yeah.
And now there's this proposal to basically overhaul the whole system. Is that the right move?
Tough call. Lots to consider. But one thing that really stuck with me from the hearing was what Senator King said about veterans having a hard time using their military skills in civilian jobs.
Oh, yeah. He was saying how veterans have these valuable skills, experience, but employers don't always see it.
Right. It's like they're speaking different languages.
Exactly. And he gave examples. Truck drivers, HVAC techs, cybersecurity people.
Fields where veterans could really shine.
But they run into these roadblocks.
Makes no sense. King even mentioned a bill, S-656, that would get rid of time limits for veterans trying to get commercial driver's licenses.
Okay, so a targeted solution, right. Removing a specific obstacle.
Yeah, could make a real difference for veterans who are struggling to find work.
Totally. Shows we need to get creative, address those unique challenges veterans face when they transition back to civilian life.
It's like there's this disconnect between what they learn in the military and what civilian jobs require.
Yeah, and that gap can lead to a lot of frustration for veterans, feeling undervalued, underemployed, even financial problems.
It's sad because they have so much to offer.
It really is.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, are we doing enough to help them find careers that actually use their talents?
Huge question. And speaking of questions, that brings us to the last piece of this puzzle, the Elizabeth Dole Veterans Programs Improvement Act. So this act, it didn't end up passing, but it tried to do a lot, for veterans. Kind of makes you wonder what its fate tells us about the whole political scene around this stuff.
Yeah, it had stuff about supporting those county veteran service officers, making it easier for veterans to get home care, beefing up long-term care, even like a study on cannabis and how it affects veterans. It was a lot.
Yeah, it's too bad it didn't go through. Those county service officers, they're lifesavers. They connect veterans with the help they need right there in their communities.
Totally. And that home and community-based care, that could have made a huge difference for older veterans who want to stay in their homes.
That does make you wonder, did it fail because there wasn't enough political will, or were some parts just too controversial? Like that cannabis study seemed to be a sticking point.
Yeah, it definitely sparked some debate. Shows how tricky the whole marijuana thing is, even when it comes to veterans' health.
For sure. Chairman Tester, he was really pushing for the act. He said a lot of veterans are already using marijuana, to deal with chronic pain or PTSD.
Makes sense.
And he was like, look, whether we like it or not, it's happening. We should be researching this, right?
Yeah.
Especially if it could be a safer option than opioids.
Yeah, that's a good point, considering the whole opioid crisis.
It is. But it seems like the politics around marijuana are just too messy for unbiased research, even when it's about helping veterans.
Yeah, it's a shame. Even when both sides want to help veterans, some things just get caught in the political crossfire.
So frustrating to
Yeah.
see something important stall out just because people can't agree.
Yeah, it highlights why it's so important to stay informed, to get involved, speak up for policies that help veterans and hold our leaders accountable.
Exactly. We can't just sit back and assume someone else will take care of it.
We all got to do our part.
That's what this whole deep dive's been about, giving you the info, the insights you need to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, we've looked at Rubio's story, his work on legislation, the challenges veterans face coming back to civilian life, the whole debate about for-profit services, and how tricky it is to navigate the political system to make real change.
It's been quite a journey. Hopefully you're leaving with a better understanding of all this and feeling like you can make a difference.
That's the goal.
Before we wrap up, I want to go back to something Senator King said
Mm-hmm.
about bridging the gap between military skills and what civilian jobs need.
Oh, yeah. How veterans' skills don't always translate easily.
Right. And that can make them feel, like their experience isn't valued.
Totally. He challenged us to think outside the box. How can we connect veterans with the right opportunities?
Yeah. Are there certain industries where they could really thrive? What can we do to make sure their talents are actually recognized and used?
Big questions, important ones. It shows how much we still need to do, to be creative, to work together, to make sure veterans have the support they deserve.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. But it's just the start, right? It's up to each of us to keep learning, to keep pushing for change, and to support the men and women who've served our country. Thanks for joining us.